This cute little girl goes to another world to save her father. The reason, for 10 long nights, Tyr waited for her father to come home, still believing the same story he always told her, that he was a powerful knight from the Taloxium Empire, a man strong enough to defeat monsters and villains. Even if they were poor, even if other kids got to enjoy things she never could, she still believed her dad would return and take her back to the life they dreamed of together. But that hope is shattered when the terrible truth reaches their home. The man she trusted more than anyone is gone, and the little girl who thought she still had time is suddenly left with nothing but his belongings and her tears. Yet, just when her world completely falls apart, something impossible happens. A strange pendant begins to glow, turns into a tiny dragon, and offers her one unbelievable chance. A chance to save her father no matter the cost. Of course, without missing a beat, she says yes. Some hours later, she's transported into a field of flowers in another dimension. There, she falls asleep and dreams about the previous night, when she wished for the dragon to save her dad. When Tyr opens her eyes, she sees a strange boy and freaks out, but after spotting the horns on his head, she calls him Kamang and realizes he is the little black dragon who wants to help her. She then looks around and sees they are somewhere else, so she asks him where and how they got there, and the boy tells her he has brought her to her dad's homeland. She learns how big and beautiful the land was before the magic stones appeared, compared to Jongno-gu. He then explains to her that since he couldn't bring her dad back to life, he brought her back to the past 7 years before she was born. Shocked, after learning she had time traveled, Tyr, who refers to the boy as Doraemon, praises his ability. But then he explains how he had used up his powers trying to bring her there and ended up making a bed for her after she had slept off. He then explains that even though her dad is currently alive, he won't know her since he hasn't met her yet, and the world is very vast, so there isn't a guarantee that she'll meet him. Still, Tyr's will remains unwavering, and she vows to find him and explain to him as long as he's alive. Tyr reveals her dad calling himself the strongest holy knight, so she puts 2 and 2 together and concludes that the knights meet at the order. With that, she grabs the little dragon and calls the order their next goal. During that period, Basto Ferrex, a wandering mercenary, tries to eat a plant but calls it disgusting. Instead, he complains about all his monster catches drying up after falling to his traps. Now he thinks about attacking a certain magic stone to draw out monsters, since the appearance of magic stones has led to more monsters. He recalled fighting a huge monster the day before and thought he'd die, but then he survived. Still, Basto calls it pointless before choosing to head back to the order. Suddenly, he hears a sound of his trap catching something and wonders what it was, so he picks up his hammer and heads there. Moments before, Tyr complained about how huge the place was and even wanted the black dragon to carry her on his wings, but he reminded her that he isn't Doraemon and she shouldn't think about it. After all, he had used up all his power. She realizes that he has helped her a lot and then suggests massaging his shoulders, but he refuses and confirms he can't really help her because if he had the power to do so, magic like teleportation can be traced, and they'll get hunted. Suddenly, he transforms back into the pendant, shocking Tyr, who assumes that he has done that to rest. So she picks the pendant up and puts it in her bag, while saying she'll find the order. Right after that, she takes a few steps and steps on a trap which snares her, and in the next moment, she sees Basto glaring at her like she's a meal, so she assumes she's done for. She quickly assures herself that she's okay and shouldn't cry, and this makes Basto worried because he's in a forest where monsters roam at night, and not only is Tyr alone, but she got caught in his trap and is trying to reassure him. She tells him that her dad is nearby and he should leave, and once he learns of this, he notes her dad will be in shock if he sees her. So he tries setting her free, but she worriedly cries for Kamang to save her. Basto encourages her to cry more, believing that way her dad, who is nearby, will hear her and come looking for her. Still, she continues, and Basto wonders why she's crying when talking about her dad, but he frees her and tells her to go to him. She gets up, surprised, and asks him if he won't come after her, and he's shocked by her reasoning, only for her to assume he's a kidnapper, and he realizes his appearance does match someone shady. Basto then tells her that the trap wasn't for her but for a rabbit, and she gets shocked. To prove his innocence, he drops his hammer and backs up slowly, then tells her to go to her dad since it's dangerous for her to be alone in such a place. She wordlessly looks at him and runs off, and this makes Basto worried that he even wonders if he should follow her till she meets her dad, but all of a sudden, Tyr trips and falls flat on the floor. Shocked, he sees her crying and learns that she has injured her leg. A short while later, he applies a bandage for her, and she learns that rabbit meat is yummy. But once he tells her all meat tastes the same, Tyr disagrees by saying cow and chicken taste different. As he listens to her whining, he wonders if she's a noble for her to talk about meat. Also, her cry was very loud earlier, but there wasn't any sign of anyone there, despite her claim that her dad was nearby. This makes him ask her where her dad was, and she honestly tells him that he's in a place called the Order. Shocked, noting that the Order is 5 days away from where they are, despite the forest being relatively close, Basto notes it's not a distance Tyr could travel alone, so he asks her what she meant when she said her dad was close earlier. Tyr then fesses up about her school 101 tactics to get away from a kidnapper, and Basto realizes she's not only learned but also came from a loving home. Once he remembers his family, he offers to take Tyr to the Order, so he beams a smile at her and offers her a ration of soup. She smiles back at him without knowing that Basto already planned to head there to report on the magic stone he had attacked the previous day. Like a spoiled brat, after learning the soup was made from carrots, Tyr looks puzzled, but Basto urges her to try it since she needs strength, so she man up and gives it a try. To her surprise, she likes it. Then Basto offers her another serving. There, she sees a writing on the bowl and reads it out, saying, "Daddy, I love you." She gets puzzled, wondering how she can read the letters since they aren't Korean like the type she learned. But then, she realizes that Basto isn't speaking Korean and she can communicate with him, so she assumes it's Kamang's ability. She then hugs her bag and wishes Kamang ate with her so he can recover faster and get to see him alongside her dad. Later that night, she has a good night's rest while Basto watches, and the following day, they set out for the Order. 4 days later, they arrive at the Order's first gate, but unfortunately, the guards stationed inform Basto that his mercenary identification number has been terminated, so he cannot pass through the gate. He should go back. Minutes later, Basto yells at the gate inn outside the first gate and curses Karl Warben, saying he must be behind his situation. The inn proprietress, an old lady, yells at Basto not to destroy the place. She carries Tyr and washes her up, wondering how she got so dirty under Basto's watch. The proprietress's husband shows up and is shocked that Basto's mercenary identification number got terminated. Basto then concludes that Karl must have bribed the Holy Knights to expel him. Otherwise, there was no way an identification number he used about 2 weeks ago would suddenly be terminated. Before coming to the inn, Basto yelled at the guard, informing them how he had attacked one of the 3 stones of Briawood, which had been giving the imperial family problems, and had been asked to report it. To his surprise, they laughed him off and said the case had already been reported by the Death Hound mercenary group, who attacked it clean and neat. They made fun of him, saying he was the one trying to steal Karl's achievement, and they called him shameless for trying to deceive them. So they yelled at him to leave quietly, or they would force him. Basto immediately gritted his teeth after learning Karl had sabotaged him again. He glared at the knights, and they felt threatened by him, but Tyr softly touched him before asking him if he was all right. Her warm gesture helped him calm down, and he apologized to her before saying it would take some time to get to the Order. With that, he took his leave, and the knights relaxed after learning he was ready to kill them, so they wondered what Karl was doing with someone like him. As Basto left, he thought about where to cook his head off, figure out what was going on, and find a way to get to the Order. Currently, he wonders why the entry is blocked to prevent civilians who lost their homes to magic stones, and he wonders what the nobles and emperor are doing. Jax, the inn proprietor, immediately yells at Basto not to go that far and he should learn to control his anger to stay safe. Basto then admits his frustration because people are dying, and Tyr sees he's sad again. The geezer calmly apologizes for what happened to Banara Village, Basto's hometown. When Tyr hears of it, she calls it Banana Village, and she wonders why she's just remembering it. Once she confirms it's Basto's village, she remembers the tale and realizes she knows him. Back then, her dad had told her he used to have 20 strong subordinates who were better than 100 weak people, and the closest amongst them to him was Basto, the hammer wielder. Originally, he was a vice captain to Death Hound, a mercenary group based in Banara Village, whose leader Karl worked Basto mercilessly. She has learned from her dad that Karl had betrayed Basto and run away alone when Basto went to attack the magic stones. Back then, Basto would fulfill all of Karl's orders with the condition that Karl would look after Basto's wife and daughter, but then disaster struck, and monsters that could only be active at night showed up during the day. During that time, Basto had gone to attack other magic stones, but then his village got caught in the onslaught, so the villagers cried for help from Karl, but the drunk bozo ordered them to settle down while he quickly assessed the situation and evacuated them. Like that, the living scum pretended to check the situation but secretly ran off. They all waited for him, but they were killed, and by the time Basto got back, he saw his dead family and mourned them. Based on the story, Basto left the Death Hound and Karl bribed the Holy Knights to erase Basto's identification card. Seeing everything play out before her, Tyr realizes it's true. Her dad had told her that Basto, who was left alone, met with him, who was ranked the greatest at the time, and he made a new ID for Basto and told him to come along because he saw that Basto was a strong and kind person. Currently, Tyr realizes all she has to do is find her dad, so he can help Basto. Unfortunately, her dad is in the Order, and they would have to go there for him to help Basto. But the question is, how to get in there? Tyr thinks about it all day, and when she falls asleep, her brows are wrinkled from all the worrying. Shortly afterwards, Basto tucks her in properly while wondering if there's a way for him to get a new mercenary identification number or to get into the Order. Even if he can't get inside, he wonders if he can entrust Tyr with someone who can get over there. He smiles while looking at her and notes that it was a short meeting. Moments after he falls asleep, Kamang comes out of the bag and notes that Tyr is sleeping peacefully. He speaks of how worried he was, but he's glad she came all the way to the Order's outskirts by herself. He then wishes to stay longer by her side, but unfortunately, He hasn't fully recovered his powers from rewinding time, and he feels pathetic about it. He then tells her to wait a little longer. The next morning, when Tyr gets up, she asks around for Basto, but the innkeeper tells her he went out early, so she asks Tyr to come shopping with her. Tyr happily agrees, and a few minutes later they arrive at the market, which is bustling and filled with a lot of homeless people. The inn's granny tells Tyr about how the situation keeps getting worse, and it's due to the large magic stones that are appearing and summoning monsters. Tyr confirms with her eyes how dire the situation is, just like Basto had told her. All of a sudden, a noble yells at someone, claiming they touched his wallet, but then the person insists that they simply bumped into him. Still, the man smacks them across the face, and Tyr is shocked by the barbarian act. It makes her remember the lady from room 203 who was always beaten up by a man every day, and notes that she was a good person. She gets mad and appears in front of the noble, yelling at him to stop hitting people, saying it's bad. Realizing Tyr isn't with her, the granny sees her right in front of the angry noble who stares daggers into the kid's eyes. The people around them echo in unison for him to leave the girl alone, but this infuriates him the more for them acting as if they can order him. Thankfully, the inn's granny shows up and talks some sense into him by reminding him that the back alleys are full of people who have nothing to lose, so he shouldn't anger anybody in the district, or else he can end up as a corpse. Startled, he looks around and sees the commoners glaring at him, so he makes a run for it. Impressed, Tyr praises the granny, who reaches out to the slapped victim and asks her why they haven't been coming to the inn. The lady speaks harshly to her, and this annoys the granny, who scolds her and reminds her of her swollen face. She orders her to follow her to the inn. Tyr, on the other hand, is frightened and wonders if she has helped a good person. Moments later, the granny serves Tyr some food and then gives the young lady a piece of cloth to wipe her face. She complains, but the granny yells back at her, so the young lady angrily wipes her face. Surprised by her vulgar behavior, Tyr calls the young lady mean. While terrified, she asks her if she stole the noble's wallet and calls her auntie. This pisses her off, so she takes off her hoodie and yells at them that she's a boy. Tyr is beyond shocked to find out that Vale is a guy. She remarks that it's her first time actually seeing a guy who looks like a girl. Vale then cuts in, confessing that he actually did snatch the man's wallet, but that it belonged to him initially. He explains that he had paid the man earlier to form a mercenary group with him, but the man had tried to cheat him and run away with his money. He explains further that someone of his status is not worthy enough to receive a knighthood, so his next best resort is to become a mercenary and start hunting monsters for money. Tyr asks if forming a mercenary group would earn them an identification card, and Vale confirms it, but he chips in that they'd have to pass a mercenary exam first. Hearing about the benefits of a guild, Tyr suggests that they form one together, but Theo lashes out at her, calling her a brat. He asks if she knows the implications of working with a mercenary, but Tyr softly replies that she has a legendary puppet mon. She also tells Vale about Basto, who is really strong too, but Vale doesn't take her seriously. Basto then interrupts, telling him how capable he is of handling small magic stones all by himself. He tells Vale about the small Briarwood's magic stone he attacked recently, but Vale discards his claim as he had heard a different story. According to what he heard, a mercenary group led by Carl had been responsible for attacking the magic stone. Tyr then cuts in, explaining how Carl had stolen the credit for Basto's work and had even terminated his identification number so he wouldn't be able to prove himself. Hearing this, Vale is completely shocked. Basto then tells him he's going to prove his claim to him sooner or later, but that he will after he gets his identification number back. He explains that he had promised to take Tyr to her dad, who is currently in the order. It is at that moment that Vale realizes that they aren't related. Piecing together the details he just heard, coupled with the fact that they both don't look like the type to lie for their personal benefits, he decides to consider forming a group with them. Besides, having wasted 2 months trying to form the perfect mercenary guild, he concludes that he has nothing to lose. He tells Basto sternly that he has to try not to be a burden on him, or he'll be left behind. With that, they form a guild. The following day, while the newly formed guild heads over to attack a magic stone, Tyr can't hide her excitement. She envisions the task as something as fun as the curricular activities she used to engage in back in daycare. She even tries to assure the other two that she's strong enough to take down some monsters. But Basto cuts her short, explaining in detail the dangers the mission they're setting out on entails. He tells her to imagine the scariest thing she knows, and Tyr immediately thinks of a Tyrannosaurus Rex. Basto then tells her that the monsters they're about to face are at least 10 times scarier than the apex predator, terrifying the young girl on the spot. After educating Tyr on the dangers of coming along with them on the mission, Basto and Vale decide to put her in the custody of Nordics, an old fortune teller. They then promise to be back before dawn as they prepare to take their leave. While they prepare to leave, Tyr recalls the things her dad used to tell her about monsters. Her father had taught her about the different kinds of monsters, as well as the various attack methods suited to taking down each kind. Before they leave, Vale teases Tyr, telling her not to cry like the little girl she is when they're gone, upsetting her in the process. Tyr then intentionally wishes only Basto good luck on the mission as they leave. On their way, Basto casually brings up his speculation about Tyr being a noble's child, but Vale debunks the theory, stating that a noble's child wouldn't be alone in the forest in the first place. While they advance further, Basto tells Vale his shocking discovery about the kind of name Tyr claims to have been given by her parents. She had told him her surname is Kim, which is a pretty strange name for a noble, especially in that era. Based on the little information Tyr had given him about her father, Basto had carried out a little research, which led him to tales about Deokpal, Tyr's father's tragic past. According to what he found out, Deokpal lost his entire family in a village and then became a wandering mercenary ever since. Before the tragic incident, Deokpal was previously the vice-captain of an exceptionally skilled group called Deathhound, and based on the information Basto has on Deathhound, he knows how skilled they are, so he believes that meeting Deokpal would be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for him. While they advance further, they notice that the deeper they go, the more the area turns into a maze. They come across small magic stones sprouting in each storage room they go through, but what they find most intriguing is the large distance between each stone. They then decide to simply attack the magic stone closer to the entrance and leave immediately. Locating the closest stone, they are taken completely by surprise, as unusually large cracks begin to form all around them. It then doesn't take them long to realize that what they just encountered isn't a small magic stone, but a medium magic stone. At the entrance of the cave Basto and Vale go into, Tyr sits in the custody of Nordics, praying desperately that they return safely. All of a sudden, large cracks begin to appear on the ground and in the sky, leaving her utterly shocked. Suddenly, monsters begin to emerge from the cracks, so Nordics is forced to protect Tyr. Given that he has some prior battle experience, Nordics holds back some of the monsters but instructs Tyr to run away as quickly as she can. While she runs, Tyr realizes that there's a high chance that Basto, Vale, and Nordics don't make it out alive. She then gets frustrated at the fact that she has always been the one getting protected, just like when her father was still alive. At that moment, she prays desperately to all the deities she can think of to grant her the strength she needs to protect the people around her. And strangely enough, her prayer gets answered on the spot as powerful skeletons begin to appear. Still in the cave, Basto and Vale do their best to stand their ground against the flocks of monsters charging at them, but can only barely manage to stay alive. Basto had scouted the same area just 2 days ago, and at that point, there were nothing but small magic stones, so the fact that a medium magic stone was able to sprout within that short period is something he finds really strange. Eventually, they both get overwhelmed by the number of monsters attacking them to the point that they start to feel helpless. Realizing that there's nothing he can do anymore, Vale convinces himself that it's better to die by his own hands rather than being torn apart by the monsters, so he brings out poison and tries to drink it. Before he gets to drink the poison, something unexpected happens as a group of powerful skeletons sprouts out of the ground and begins to attack the monsters on their behalf, leaving them in disarray. Realizing that that could only be the ability of a necromancer, both men confront each other to know if the other was responsible for the spell, but they both deny it. They then get confused because not only do they not know the caster of the spell, but necromancy is a magic that only appeared in old legends. Shortly after, they get approached by Tyr in the midst of some skeletons who comes crying to them about how she was scared that they would have died. But something feels quite strange. The skeletons around her keep guarding and reporting details to her, almost like she's their master. That's when it clicks to them that the little girl they've been trying to protect is the one responsible for the powerful necromancy magic. Shortly after, they are joined by Nordics, who appears to be badly injured. He had also been saved by the skeletons while at the brink of death. Due to their number advantage and synchronization, the skeletons had not only defeated all the escaping monsters, leaving none left behind. One of the skeletons also reports to Tyr that they have gathered all the monster cores in the cave. When they get back to the cave, they are surprised not only at the number of monster cores they find. The monster cores are so vital to them that without them, they wouldn't be able to pass their mercenary exam. Normally, it should take them a long while to extract and gather the cores from each monster they take down, but seeing everything effortlessly gathered together in one spot feels like a dream come true. The three men then take their time to explain how rare it is for someone her age to be as powerful as she is. But all the while, all Tyr can think of is the fact that her father too was once regarded as the strongest. She then calmly replies that blood is thicker than water, taking the whole group by surprise. Still in the cave, the men ask Tyr what she means by those words, so she's forced to brag a bit about her father. She tells them that her father was the strongest holy knight, so they realize that she must have probably inherited her abilities from him. But something still feels odd about the whole narration. In their world, two different types of abilities awaken: holy power and magical power. Holy knights awaken holy power and use that strength in swords, while mages awaken magical power and use various forms of magic as a result. The two different types stand at opposite ends from each other, so there are only rare exceptions where a child born to a holy knight would awaken magical power. Superstitions even have it that in most cases, children born with power opposite to their parents often ruin their surroundings and cause disaster. Thinking deeply about Tyr's claim about her father being the strongest holy knight, Theo connects the dots to a certain noble family called Luminen, the House. Luminen is an aristocratic family that has produced knights with high-purity holy power for generations. Tyr also tells them that she had lived alone with her father in a small, cozy house, debunking everything they thought about her belonging to the Luminen household. She tells them about how her father had suddenly left one day too, making her end up all alone with Kamang in the forest. Taking a closer look at her stone necklace, Theo immediately identifies it as a permanent summon that she subconsciously summoned after awakening her power. She then tells them that now that they can finally pass their mercenary exam, she'll definitely find her father at the Order, even though he won't recognize her. When they ask what she means, she explains that when Kamang used his magic to turn back time, they ended up in a time where her father didn't know her yet, almost like she had been erased from his head. Listening to her story, the men come up with their own theories about what happened. According to them, Tyr had been born into the high and mighty Luminen family as an anomaly with magic power. So to protect her, her father must have escaped with her and lived with her in a stable out in the woods. But then someone must have still intervened and erased Tyr from his mind, causing him to abandon her in the forest. While Theo rages on with his theories on the issue, Basto tells him to slow down as they can't be certain about anything yet. Theo then assures Tyr that although she might be discarded as too young to join a mercenary group, they'd find a way around it and ensure she reunites with her dad. They each thank her for saving their lives, but warn her specifically to keep her abilities hidden, so she doesn't become a target to the bad guys. Terrified, Tyr agrees to what she's told, as she can't afford to jeopardize her sole mission of finding her father. Still, they know how much of an asset her power would be to the group, so they think of ways to sign her up as a member while concealing her identity and powers. Tyr then comes up with an interesting idea where she'd claim to be an old man who transformed into a 4-year-old. That way, she'd be able to remain the figurehead boss of the mercenary group, so she can be secretly capable. A few days later, the group decides to head to the Order to actualize their plan. When they arrive at the Order to register their mercenary guild, they tender the monster stones they acquired, and the knights attending wonder how they were able to gather that much. Aside from Basto, who looks fairly strong, the rest of the group seem like washed-up filler characters. When they try to interrogate them, to their surprise, they are answered by Tyr, who sternly introduces herself as a great archmage and necromancer, asking them not to disrespect her. While the knights wonder what business a child has in a place like that, Tyr summons one of her skeleton soldiers and flexes it on them to prove her claim. Shocked, they ask her to state her name, but Basto cuts in, calling them insolent for daring to ask his lord's name. Tyr then orders Basto to stand down. They had taken their time to rehearse the kind of act they would play to make Tyr live up to the Necromancer King title beforehand. As rehearsed, Tyr intimidates the knights further with her skeleton while telling them that they cannot handle her true name. She tells them her alias is Necromancer King and that they should address her as that. Meanwhile, Theo secretly makes fun of the way she mispronounces certain words the whole time. Turns out the intimidation works, as the knights take down their names and begin the official registration immediately. They are then led to a waiting room to await the official document. In the waiting room, Nordics, who is only hired to fill in the minimum requirement number, asks them to let him stick around with them, at least until he's able to repay Tyr for saving him, and they agree. He asks if Tyr has thought of a name for the group, but Tyr, who was really occupied with planning how to act appropriately, didn't think of it. She suggests a childish name, but it only makes Theo make fun of her loudly. When a knight returns to attend to them, he reveals that their mercenary number has been revealed, but tells Tyr he would like to ask her some further questions. Recalling the strict instructions she had received from the rest about not revealing her identity earlier, Tyr simply intimidates the knight with one of her skeleton soldiers again until he agrees to stop asking. Before the knight leaves, he reveals that they've received strict orders from above that they should not give an identification number to Basto. When they asked why, he revealed that Basto had been reported by Carl to have committed illegal acts within the mercenary group. According to Carl, Basto had extorted large amounts of money and goods from the guild and run away with it. Turns out Carl was the one responsible for committing all these atrocities he accused Basto of doing. He had then terminated his identification number without any verification process, so he would not be able to prove his innocence. Hearing this, Basto goes into a rage because not only did Carl rob him of a chance to protect his family, but he also labeled him as a criminal when he hadn't committed any offense. Smart as he is, Theo figures out that Carl must have tried to bribe someone to establish those kinds of orders. He then decides to interrogate the knight about it. Hearing the word bribery, Tyr recalls what she was taught about bribery from her previous timeline, so she's able to understand the implications of what Carl is doing to oppress Basto. The knight then explains that he understands Basto's predicament, but sadly even he cannot do anything about it, as the person Carl bribed is a high-ranking commander who is newly appointed. Realizing that there's nothing he can do, Basto begins to lose himself in his thoughts. He had signed up for the mercenary life because he believed it was the only way he could avenge his family. He instructs Theo to escort Tyr away while he finds a way to settle things, only to get interrupted by the biggest shock of his life. Tyre asks the knight for the amount Carl offered. She then tells him she'll be willing to compete with the amount of money he offered. With that, she opens her backpack and tenders an insurmountable amount of precious jewels. She then tells him she's willing to offer even more, and unlike the usual kind of bribe, which is usually offered in apple boxes, she announces that she'll be giving it openly in luxury bags, taking the whole room by surprise. 1 hour later, a new identification number is issued to Basto. Now that they're official, they're required to register the name of their group. To everyone's surprise, Tyr registers their mercenary group as Agavert, which turns out way better than they expected. Later, when they ask her how she came up with the name, she reveals that she had seen the word Travaga written boldly on a signpost during their wait, so she decided to arrange the letters backwards. While they leave, Basto thanks Tyr genuinely, promising to help her find her father no matter what. She then orders that they eat something delicious when they get back to their inn. After that moment, rumors began to spread about the mysterious mercenary group. It then doesn't take long for the news to get to Tessitan Veronio, the leader of the Trevaga mercenary group. In the outskirts of the city at the Trevaga mercenary group, some of Tessitan's subjects spread the news about the interesting Agavert mercenary group. While some of the members discuss if the new mercenary group is worth their interest, Alaric, a superior member, shares what he knows about the group. According to the facts he has gathered, one of the members of the group is a mage, which is already rare enough on its own. To become a mage, one must have been born with magical powers as an innate talent, and even with that, it takes a heckload of training to get to that realm. He explains further that not only is this mysterious individual a mage, but the attribute he's rumored to control is necromancy, an attribute they've only heard of in legends. Intrigued, Tessitan asks if the information is verified, and Alaric confirms it as he had gotten it from a trusted source. Livia, one of the members of the group, remarks that all the previous mages in the entire continent had been snatched up by the top-ranking mercenary group, so having a new one suddenly emerge as a group leader is something remarkable. Tessitan goes through the names of the group members and is surprised that he has never heard anything about them before, except for Basto, who was pretty well known when he was the vice-captain of the Death Hound. Realizing that the mysterious mage had used Necromancer King as an alias instead of an actual name, coupled with the fact that he claims to have transformed into the form of a 4-year-old, he concludes that the individual is definitely an interesting fellow. He then jokingly tells other mercenary group leaders to start getting nervous so they don't fall behind this Necromancer King in rank. This pisses off the Reaper leader, whose party ranked second, and he yells at Tessitan for acting cocky because he's the first. To him, he believes it won't be long before that position gets snatched up. In reality, he knows that ever since Tessitan founded Trevaga and appeared, he hadn't dropped from the first place in the mercenary group rankings, not even once. But that doesn't change Reaper's beliefs. After hearing Reaper lash out at him, Tessitan makes fun of him by asking if he thinks he'll take his position if he slips up. And this pisses Reaper because not in the slightest is Tessitan bothered, and he scolds Reaper by telling him that going to the gym isn't enough to make him the first because he'll also have to use his head. Tessitan gets up along with his party, and as they are about to leave, he advises Reaper not to be so annoying, or else he won't leave a single magic stone for Reaper to attack from that moment. Infuriated, Reaper calls him an insufferable dude. Outside the first gate in, Tyre bathes in sunlight and stuffs her mouth with some cookies the old crone baked. Vale is glad she's happy, and he refers to her as Necromancer King, but she feels embarrassed when he calls her that, so she tells him to call her Tyr if it's just them. The young man barely holds himself back from bursting out laughing. Then he asks her if she likes the name so much and pokes her cheek while at it. She thinks about it for a bit and notes that the strongest characters have nicknames. After all, the popular Puppetmon dolls too have aliases. She then talks gibberish, which Vale doesn't understand, and she asks him if he's dumb, but then Basto and Nordic show up with their group's cloak, which has her cute rabbit doll design. Her eyes glimmer at it, and the grown men do not have any problem with it except Vale, who calls it a pink bug, shattering Tyr's heart. Basto then reminds him of their circumstances and why Tyr, their leader's identity, mustn't be exposed, which means that once she makes a decision, it cannot be ignored. Vale knows that's the case, but cannot stand the image which looks so girly, and he calls it a moldy bug. Nordics then recollects how he and Tyr worked really hard to draw it, and it was difficult for her to pick among the Puppetmon. Now Vale brings out ink and says he's going to erase it, and Tyr, who sees him, leaps at him and bites his arm, clinging to him like a piranha. He yells at her for getting drool on his arm and compares her to a dog, but she refuses. Still, he tells her he'll do what he has to do. And as he prepares to pour the ink on the image, Tyr cries out to him to stop, and to their surprise, the ink pours away. Vale then looks at his hand and sees blood dripping from it and sees a talking dragon, asking if the reason he was summoned was because of Vale's tantrum. Kamang licks itself after biting Vale's finger, shocking everyone, including Tyr. Vale then asks Tyr if he summoned her beast to attack him, but she denies that being the case. Basto then throws Vale a napkin and tells him not to interrogate Tyr any further, and just like he must have heard from Nordics about Tyr not awakening her power for long, so controlling it would be difficult. Vale tries his best to keep his cool as he swipes the blood of his finger, and he states that the act is against a member. Basto then corrects him by warning Vale not to act brashly because he'll lose. Vale stares at the dragon, who simply smirks at him, and this pisses him off, so he cracks his knuckles and prepares to fight. Quickly, Tyr grabs her dragon, saying she can't forgive him, and runs upstairs to scold him. On getting there, she stares menacingly at Kamang and asks him why he hurt Vale, but Kamang simply lies down, and it surprises Tyr, who tries to scold him some more by asking him who told him to do so. But then, he tells her it's his choice, and she realizes his free will and how he can choose to answer. She then tries to warn him not to hurt people, but then he reminds her that she first bit Vale. Shocked, Tyr tries to defend herself, but then Kamang praises her for doing well, because he didn't know she could go so far alone without him. He then calls himself pathetic for hibernating so long just to turn back time a bit. She readily defends him by reminding him he said touching dimensions is hard, but Kamang corrects her by saying he used a lot of power because he's weak. He then advises Tyr to continue doing what she was doing, and it's better to hide her identity with her Necromancer King title, and he too, as her permanent summon. She wonders if he too has a reason to hide his identity, and then agrees not to tell anyone that he's a legendary puppet monster. Just then, he tells her his name, Lucario. Kamang transforms into a boy, and having known that it's thanks to him, she'll get to see her dad again. Tyr thanks Lucario and hugs him. She then cleans her snotty nose and informs him that they are entering the Order the very next day and will find her dad and definitely repay Lucario for this kindness. She tells him whenever he's tired he should rest in her bag, and to keep his identity it's better to continue calling him Kamang. Without giving him a chance to argue, she finalizes her decision before dragging him along with her. Once their hands touch, Lucario confirms that it was her power that awakened him on that fateful night. She heads downstairs happily and tells the others that Kamang will apologize. But they look at her like she has lost it. Then she realizes that he has turned back into the pendant. Vale lets it slide, saying it's cool before his finger gets bitten off, and this makes her happy, so she hugs him. But then he thinks of her as a weirdo. The next day, Basto informs her that as they are about to head out, from that moment she'll be the Necromancer King again, and she agrees with them. Later that day, they departed the inn and left for the Order, and when they passed through the Order gate, Tyr had expected to see big buildings like Jongno-gu, but she realized the place was much bigger than she thought, and instead, she encountered scenery she had only seen on TV. As they walk through the desert, Vale asks Basto why they will need to go to the Populosa weapon district to fix his warhammer, because they can't go back and rent a carriage, but Basto says they have to save money until they reach the center of the Order. Vale then remembers how they emptied every penny they had because of the bribe to let Basto in. Nordics, on the other hand, speaks of how desolate the desert is, despite it being many years since the land was attacked by monsters. As he walks ahead, Vale finds it weird that Nordics has more stamina than him. He glances at Tyr and finds it funny that she, who was energetic earlier when they were passing through the busy streets, had already fallen asleep, but then Basto says it's easier for them to move while she's asleep, and then he urges them to start moving. During that period, Tyr, who quickly fell asleep, dreamed of the old days when she and her dad were together. Back then, he explained that it was an accident that brought them to Jongno-gu. He explained that he didn't know what happened and how they got there, but if they kept on searching, they should find a way for them to return. Then she encouraged him, and he agreed, reassuring her that they would find a way to return home together. Tyr had learned firsthand how hard it was for her dad to keep smiling even after falling into an unfamiliar world, which must have been scary and sad. She was sure that if she hadn't come across Basto by chance, she would still be wandering the forest alone, and it was thanks to her dad telling her about this world every day that although the place feels unfamiliar, she could feel reassured thanks to his stories. She has thought about how hard it must have been to suddenly be transported to Jongno-gu, but she tells him to wait a little longer because she will give him all the jewels and definitely protect him this time around. 2 days later, they arrive at Pearlport City, and Nordics notes that the place hasn't changed at all. Vale, on the other hand, catches his breath and complains about how they had walked for 2 days straight, but Nordics, who claimed he was over 70, feels perfectly fine. The geezer then asks if they want to look around the city, but then Basto suggests they secure a room and get properly settled because it'll take a week to Populosa Weapon District. Nordics then suggests the Red Glove Inn, since it's the only place that accepts credit, and for that reason it was always crowded with mercenaries, so it's perfect for investigating information about Tyr's parents while they are there. On getting to the inn, Nordics says he'll check to see if there are available rooms, so he tells them to wait outside. Once he goes in, Vale asks if Tyr is still asleep, and Basto says it's only natural, given that they walked rough roads all day the previous day. Then, they had gone through a lot of effort in pulling her out when she fell into a sand trap. Also, during the night when they camped, Vale wasn't ready to let other mercenaries passing by see their trump card asleep. Presently, they see that Nordics is taking a while, so they enter the inn just to have a seat. There, the innkeeper informs them that they have a guest who'll check out early that day, but until then, there's no room. Curious, Vale asks what they're talking about, and the innkeeper named Rudy fills him in. But just then, Tessitan comes out of his inn, and the entire Agavert party, aside from the sleeping Tyre, is shocked to see him. He grumbles to Rudy, and as he walks down the stairs, Vale has his eyes glued to him, while noting that just standing before Tessitan alone is far overwhelming. Tessitan then looks at Tyr, who is covered in clothes, and she piques his interest, so he asks who she is, but suddenly, his teammate calls out to him and urges him to be ready because the boat is already about to depart. Left with no choice, Tessitan leaves, and as soon as he is out of the inn, Agavert's party members talk about his impressive presence and the rumors of his strange swordsmanship. Vale speaks about how he once heard about Tessitan's sword style being noble and vulgar at the same time, and he finds it unbelievable because it sounds like something only someone who lost to Tessitan would make up. After all, they were upset. Rudy, who learns of the rumor, says it makes sense and they aren't entirely wrong. Basto then asks for more details, but it isn't professional for Rudy to snitch on his customer, so he waves them off and offers them the free room. Tyr, on the other hand, dreams where she hears her dad's voice, and she imagines her dad as the customer while she's the innkeeper. When she opens her eyes, she sees an unfamiliar ceiling and freaks out, so Basto acts kindly towards her, unlike Vale, who is strict with her like a mother, and says it was high time she woke up either way, else she wouldn't be able to sleep at night. Nordics then tells her that they've arrived at Pearl City and are in an inn. She glances outside the window, observing the city while the others head downstairs to attend to some business. As soon as they leave the room, they make up their mind to learn more about the Luminen family and also the whereabouts of Kim Young-soo, so they go straight to the inn's basement dining hall to investigate. Meanwhile, Tyre admits that Talokium is as beautiful as her dad had once told her, and from what she knows, she calls men ships and women ports. Downstairs, they try asking about who Kim Young-soo is, but the people there haven't heard of such a name before. One angry person then yells at Basto for talking about holy nights after showing his face for the first time in a long while. Vale then joins the conversation by yelling at the man for acting high and mighty. The confused man asks who he is, and Vale reveals he knows Basto very well. Vale then taunts him by offering the man a drink and saying he doesn't know anything about the knights, which is why the man is yelling loudly. The dude immediately gets fired up, so he gulps the beer while yelling at them to sit down because he's about to tell them everything he knows about the Luminen family. Just then, Tyr spots Tessitan and looks at him like he has a familiar face. As Tyr watches the members of the Travaga mercenary group walk through the street, she wonders if the reason she's seeing a handsome man who looks so familiar to her father is that she dreamt about him the previous night. She immediately puts on her hood disguise and dashes through the receptionist area, where Rudy is fast asleep, to meet them. When she reaches the road, she takes a closer look at Tessitan and realizes that he's not a look-alike, but actually her dad himself, causing her to leap forward in excitement. Meanwhile, at the bar, a drunk man explains that the Luminen family is filled with some of the strongest knights in the Empire, and the head of the family, Valentia, has 4 sons, who are all high-ranking holy knights. He reveals that the first son, Edmund, is the tactical advisor of the Knight Order, the second son, Leonardo, is the division commander, the third son is the chief medical officer, but before he can mention the fourth, Vale cuts him off, saying he already knows everything. He then starts yelling at Basto, asking why he feels he doesn't know about the popular Luminen family, but the man tells him to just listen to the end of his explanation. The man then discloses that even though the first 3 sons are very famous, the whereabouts of the family's 4th son are completely unknown. Vale finds this shocking, but he asks the man if it's possible that the 4th son married against their family's wishes and ran away after having a child. However, the man reveals that the youngest in the family just became an adult the previous year, and this confuses them even more because it's almost impossible for the man to have a 4-year-old child at that age. At the same time, Tyr politely tells a bunch of strangers around her to excuse her as she struggles through the crowd, hoping to meet her long-lost dad. But the Travaga squad has already boarded a boat. However, she still runs full steam ahead to meet them, only to get knocked down by a suitcase being carried by a random stranger. At the bar, Vale asks the man if there are other young masters of the house, but the man says it would have been the hottest news in town if something so joyous happened in their family. Vale agrees because he knows the Luminen would throw a big extravagant party, which involves the Emperor and Empress if they have a new birth, and this means there's one remaining possibility. Back on the street, Tyr grabs onto her head, wondering what hit her, but when she remembers the voice of her dad calling out to her, she runs forward to catch the ship. As more of her dad's loving words flood her mind, she crushes ahead passionately with tears in her eyes, calling out to her daddy. When Tessitan hears her voice, he turns back and sees her passionately reaching out to him, with tears standing in her eyes due to the loving flashbacks that invaded her mind at the moment. But since he doesn't know her, he ignores her and moves ahead. As the ship leaves, Tyr cries desperately, eventually falling to her knees as more tears stream from her eyes. Back at the bar, Vale asks if there's a possibility that the head of the Luminen family, Valentia, had a late child with another woman. But the man says it's not possible because Valentia loved his wife Eleonora, the saint of Richard, with his entire body and soul throughout his life. Basto adds that the love story between Valentia and Eleonora, who wielded the most powerful holy power in history, is very famous, and because of this, he guesses that their marital harmony was also very exquisite. However, Vale says it's ridiculous because no one knows what happens between a married couple and explains that behind the scenes, most seemingly happy noble couples plot to destroy each other. Because of this, he concludes that if the head of the Luminen family did have an illegitimate child, then it would definitely be connected to what happened to Eleonora. Just then, Nordics arrives and informs them that Tyr is missing, causing everyone at the table to lose their cool. Basto and Vale immediately rush out into the streets to look for them, but the merchants they ask don't know anything about where she went. However, Nordics informs them that someone saw a girl walking alone at the dock, and this makes Basto so scared that he regrets telling her to stay alone in her room. Vale tells him to hurry while running towards the dock, and even though he's telling them that everything will be fine since Tyr is a smart girl, he feels terrible for doing something as dumb as leaving a young girl all alone and prays that nothing happens to her. When they arrive at the dock, they see Tyr all crouched up on the ground and rush towards her while desperately calling her name. As she lies on the ground, filled with misery, she remembers Kamong telling her that the version of her father she'd meet in this time period would have no idea who she is, and it's at that moment she finally understands what he means. She initially thought that meeting her dad would allow her to explain everything because all she wanted was for him to be alive. But now she realizes that approaching him when he doesn't know her would only make him find her annoying and abandon her. As her teammates help her back up, she remembers how her dad used to play with her while telling her he loved her more than anyone else in the world, and that he could do anything so long as he had her by his side. It's at that moment she realizes that things will never go back to how they used to be, and this makes her bawl her eyes out once again while her concerned teammates look on. When they return to the inn, Vale complains to the others that Tyr is driving him insane because she'd lost her voice from crying for her daddy, but Basto tells him to lower his voice. Nordics feels pity for her and wonders why she suddenly became like this, but Vale calls her a stupid brat, asking why she's whining about her missing daddy despite claiming to be a powerful necromancer. When Nordics asks if they found any information about the Luminen family, Vale says none of the 4 young masters had any joyous news. Even though the head of the family is the most likely suspect and he's not too old to have an offspring, Basto doubts that it's him because Tyr says she lived together with her dad, and Duke Luminen never missed any official events. In fact, he's currently engaged in the magic stone attacks, and even when sieges are prolonged, he camps for months and goes back and forth to battlefields. Vale also brings up the fact that Tyr said he can't remember her due to the oblivion magic he's under, and this doesn't make sense because no one would dare tamper with the Lord of Luminen's memories. After brainstorming for several more minutes, Nordic says they shouldn't blindly trust the clue that Tyr's dad is the most powerful holy knight and guesses that the name Kim Young-soo is also an alias. He knows that Tyr is smart and wouldn't want to tell any lies, but he admits that they lack clues and tells the others that they should explicitly ask her about her father when she wakes up from her slumber. This leaves Basto speechless as he remembers a heartwarming moment where he hugged Tyr, and Vale then asks the big question, which is what will happen to the Agavert group when she finds her dad. Meanwhile, Tyr is having a dream about the Travaga group facing off against a group of deadly monsters. When Tessidon tells Livia to protect her, Tyr is surprised to hear her dad's voice, but she wonders who Livia is. She also notices that her body isn't moving like she wants it to. While holding on to her, Livia desperately calls out Alaric, who has been injured by a giant monster, and it's at that moment that Tyr opens her eyes and sees that there are monsters and people around. Alaric tells Livia not to come close and instructs her to take baby Tyr and run away. At first, Livia tries to argue with him out of concern for his well-being, but when he asks her if she's willing to let the little girl get hurt, she grabs Tyr tightly and assures her that she'll be fine. However, when she tries to move forward, she suddenly falls to her knees due to the injuries she'd sustained. But she still tries to comfort Tyr, telling her that they need to find a way to escape the crack. Even though Tyr doesn't know who's holding her, she takes comfort in Livia's cold skin as she hugs her and calls out to her dad. As Livia wonders what to do to save Tyr, Tessiton arrives and takes Tyr from her hand before asking her when she was poisoned. This excites her so much that she calls out to her daddy from her mind, even though she can't speak as a baby. As Livia struggles with her damaged body, she apologizes to Tessitan and also to Tyr since she promised to protect her. She then collapses to the ground, causing Tessitan to call her name out of concern and asks him if Alaric is dead. Tessitan is far too concerned for her to even answer her question. But as her body fully succumbs to the poison, she tells him it's fine to leave them behind and escape. She claims that making it this far was amazing and brings up how they all went from being ordinary people who were slashing pig throats in the alley to becoming warriors on the battlefield with him. As she stretches her hand towards little Tyr, she expresses regret over the fact that she wouldn't get to see her walk like she wanted and tells her to be healthy and always be cheerful with everyone, especially Tessitan. Her hand then falls to the ground and her teary eyes go blank, showing that she's finally given up the ghost. So Tessitan starts walking away with Tyr while assuring her that everything will be okay. He promises her that they'll get out of there, and once they do, everything will be fine again, but standing in front of him is a large group of terrifying monsters. Seeing this, Tyr immediately starts panicking as she realizes that her dad is in danger, and in the real world, she wakes up from this nightmare screaming. She's surprised that she had such an unusual dream, but she realizes that it's the first time she's had a dream that's so vivid, making her wonder if it was actually a dream in the first place or something that actually happened in the past. She remembers how Livia called Basto's name during her final words and recalls that her dad once mentioned Basto as one of his comrades. Since she was a very young baby in the dream, she wonders if those events actually happened when she was still a baby. During one of her cozy moments with her dad, he says coming to that place was an accident, and this makes her wonder if the accident he's actually talking about is the dream she just had. However, she's also confused about the fact that Livia called him a leader in the dream, even though he claimed he was a holy knight, and she gets teary-eyed while admitting that she doesn't actually know anything. She feels sad because she thought everything would be fine once she reunited with her father. But suddenly, Kamang appears, and asks her what she wants to do next, before asking her if she found Tessatan. At that moment, Tyr stares deeply into his eyes while struggling with her tears and admits that he was right. She remembers the previous conversation she had with him in his dragon form, where he told her that her dad would completely forget about her when they met, and she no longer has the confidence to tell him that she's actually his daughter. As Kamang holds onto her face, she spills even more tears while asking him what she should do next. She then hugs him tightly while admitting that she misses her dad more than anything because she really loves him. While hugging her, Kamang remembers that he could faintly hear Tyr and Tessatan's voices while he was asleep in the other world. When he heard her laughing, he felt good. But on the days when she cried, his heart felt uncomfortable, like the whole world was shattering inside him. While holding her tightly, he remembers the first time they met when Tyr was crying seriously after losing her father, and he realizes that the entire reason he came to their world in the first place was to find a way to stop her tears. He then informs her that in the world, there's something called destiny recurrence. This confuses her, so he explains that no matter what kind of life a person relives, most humans will meet the same fate. Before he can finish his explanation, she asks if he means that her dad will fall into Jongno-gu again, and in her mind, she's terrified by the idea that this version of her dad, Tessatan, will fall victim to the very monster incident that destroyed him in her original timeline. However, she decides that she'll stop it since her dad isn't doomed yet, but she's worried that he'll fall into Korea again. She then remembers a day in the past when Granny was walking in the street with her, and two old-timers were talking about them. One of them said Tessatan wouldn't have to suffer as much if he stayed alone, and the other agreed, saying she's surprised by how diligent he is because it wouldn't be strange if he sent her away. However, her granny tells the ladies to shut their traps since it's none of their business. Because of this flashback, she decides that she'll do her best to make sure her dad doesn't suffer because of her and disappear forever. With all the boldness in the world, she declares that while she's in his homeland, she'll make sure that her dad, Tessatan, lives until he's a 100-year-old grandpa. Hearing this, Kamang smiles and tells her that she's the only one who can pull it off. Just then, she hears a voice coming from her door, asking her if she's done crying, and she immediately recognizes the voice as that of Vale. When the door opens, she sees all three of her companions, with Vale asking her if she can eat, while the other two show similar levels of concern for her. Nordics then tells her there's an important question she needs to ask, and this stuns her. During breakfast, they ask her for a detailed description of her dad's appearance, as well as the place where they live together. And when she asks why they're asking for those things in particular, Basto says they intend to help her find her dad but lack the necessary information to do so. At first, she's surprised, but then she remembers that she only told them her dad's name, so she boldly reveals that she and her dad lived in Jongno-gu. This confuses everyone, so she tells them about all the different things in the town she stayed in before revealing that her dad suddenly moved to Korea with her. She then points to her bag while telling them that it's a handbag from Jongno-gu. And it's at that moment that Basto realizes that the logo on the bag isn't a crest, but actually writing. Hearing this, Vale admits that Old Man Nordics was right since she didn't seem to be telling any lies, but he still finds her story very confusing. Tyr claims that she isn't lying, so Vale agrees with her before advising the group to return to their original mission, which is heading to the Order and visiting the Holy Knights. When he asks to confirm if Tyr's dad is in Jongno-gu, she nods while assuring him that he's there since she saw him earlier. Vale then asks if she'll leave Agavert when she finds her father, and this question leaves her speechless. During an earlier conversation between her three teammates, Vale asks the others if she'll dissolve Agavert after finding her dad, and Basto claims it's highly likely. He claims he'll go back to being a wandering mercenary if it happens, and when he asks Nordics for his plans, the old mage says he'll go back to the gate area since he never intended to become a mercenary. However, Vale refuses to accept this because in his mind, finding her dad and Tyr being the leader of the group are two separate things. He asks the others if they could have her dad join Agavert too, if she absolutely can't stand being apart from him because he doesn't want to miss out on a golden opportunity. He explains that he's not asking Tyr to work because dark attribute mages are so rare that just existing makes them legends, but if she continues to be the group's head, they can grow their mercenary group and aim for the first rank, thereby making it easier to protect Tyr and her dad. Hearing this, Basto admits that it makes sense, but claims it wouldn't be easy because mercenary work is so dangerous that he'd oppose it if he were her father. Vale knows that he's right, but he needs Agavert with the Necromancer King as the leader because he doesn't want to go back to suffering and poverty. However, in the present, Tyr assures them that she won't leave the mercenary group and puts her cup down while boldly declaring that she'll become independent of her dad from now on. Hearing this, Basto and Nordics are so stunned that their jaws drop to the floor, but Vale is fascinated with her sudden resolve. Basto asks her how she arrived at that conclusion, but then rephrases his question to ask if she means that she'll stop looking for her dad. Tyr says that's not what she means, because she still has to find him. But when she thinks about the next step in her master plan, she suddenly goes somber and tells them that she won't cling to him to care for her like before. Basto is shocked to hear this, but even more stunned by Granny, who then watches her tell the others that she and her dad will live their own lives moving forward because she can't stay wrapped up in his coattails forever. Before Basto can express his concerns with her new plan, Vale rushes over to her and cheerfully supports her idea, claiming that 4 years old is more than enough for her to become independent. He reveals that he also grew up without parents from when he was merely 2 years old, and as everyone grows more curious about his backstory, he says they don't need to know that. He then tells Tyr that they need to start earning money properly as mercenaries, since she's now decided to become independent, and assures her that her loyal teammates at Agavert are always available to help her when she's in trouble. This makes her remember that she's now the Necromancer King, and she decides to work hard from that day on. Hearing this, Vale tells her to write a pledge on a piece of paper, swearing to never leave Agavert until she dies. But Tyr is stunned because she's never been asked to do something like that. He also informs her that she can only withdraw from this agreement if she has permission from all 3 members and asks her to sign, as the others wonder how he put everything together so fast. Basto knows that the document won't have any legal binding, but he still decides to write a pledge as well, and Nordics agrees to join in because it seems fun. Later that night, as Nordics tucks Tyr in, she asks Basto if he really hates Holy Knights, and he confirms that he doesn't like them. When Vale mentions that all mercenaries hate them, Tyr asks if the reason for this beef is that the Holy Knights all took bribes, but he teases her by playfully suggesting that her dad was one of the Holy Knights who took bribes. Tyr argues that her dad is nice, but in her mind, she wonders why Basto claims to hate Holy Knights, even though he was working with her dad before the accident in her dream. As she remembers the passing words of Livia, she wonders if her dad was actually doing an undercover stakeout like the cops on TV, since she clearly heard him say he's a Holy Knight. She tells Basto that she's curious as to why he hates Holy Knights, and Basto replies that it's because the Imperial family abandoned the mercenaries first. To make things clearer, he specified that they abandoned everyone other than nobles. Back then, magic stones suddenly erupted in the continent, causing monsters to pour out of the cracks. Since the Empire was on the brink of ruin, they abandoned most of the land except for the Order and tried to guard only a small portion of the territory with the knights they had. In these abandoned lands, people rose and called themselves mercenaries as they attacked magic stones to build up power and reclaimed their land from the monsters. While local lords and mercenaries fought hard to reclaim their territory, the Imperial family pretended not to know about anything and offered no support. Basto then claims that the mercenaries don't actually hate the Holy Knights, but rather they despise the Imperial family's choice. After the mercenaries reclaimed the territory, the conflict between the Order and non-Order regions worsened, so to win back the public support, the Imperial family expanded the Order's borders, but only to regions that they found useful, and one of those is Pearl City, where the Agavert squad is currently staying. While lying on his bed, Nordics explains that there were many mercenaries in Pearl City because the place always had a large floating population. So until the Imperial family and the Church placed a concentration there, the whole region had deep hatred for the Imperial family. When Tyr asks what a consecration is, Nordics says that it means offered to God to make it holy, and it's used to ask for divine protection. Pearl City, being a holy ground of God, came under the protection of a being called Saradin through a sacred ritual, thereby ensuring that the city would be protected from magic stones and monsters. Hearing this, Tyr asks if things really got better with no magic stones appearing, and he tells her that it's how things have been since the consecration before telling her to go to bed. However, Tyr angrily grabs her pillow, ranting about how greedy the Imperial army is, and she claims that even if her dad is a Holy Knight, he'd probably hate the Imperial family as well. Basto is shocked to hear this, but Vale praises her for speaking facts. Tyr further states that if the Imperial family has something that is effective, they should consecrate it everywhere, because failure to do so in other cities will leave them in a state where they constantly have to fight. Nordic says she's right, but Tyr suddenly gets somber again as she begs Basto not to hate her dad when they finally find him. This makes Basto smile, and he tells her to sleep so that they can do their Necromancer King speech training the next day, and she agrees. The next morning, some men are troubled because the waves are high even though the weather is clear, and one of them, named Raul, asks his partner what they should do since other ships are leaving. His partner Enzo says they'll catch big fish easily if they go where the other captains mentioned, and claims that ever since he quit being a holy knight, his body aches when he doesn't move. They both decide to catch a big fish and tell their mother they're doing okay so she can rest easy. Some years ago, during a family camping trip, their dad asked them what a knight's duty on the battlefield is, and they both agreed that it's to wipe out the enemy. This makes their dad smile, but he tells them that his job is a little different because his duty is to protect both of them, just as he promised their mother. He then pats them on the head, causing them to laugh cheerfully with him. Soon after, they were attacked by a deadly monster, and their dad faced off against it to protect them, but died in the process. When they returned home and broke this news to their family, their mother cried while clutching her dead husband's sword, and that was when they decided to protect their mother at all costs. Back in the present,